And also very important topic, dear friends, Western backed terrorist regime under orders of its NATO backers conducting strikes, not just on civilians, not just on some industrial areas, but on nuclear power plants. As you know, several times were attacks on Smolensk nuclear power plant, Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is under attack almost on daily basis, Kursk nuclear power plant, and we have this report today from TASS news agency that Zaporozhye NPP stated that the Ukrainian armed forces are attempting to create a threat of a nuclear catastrophe. Let me give you some details on that. So, and dear friends, as I reported a couple of days ago, 10th time, if I remember correctly, Zaporozhye nuclear power plant was cut off as a result of terrorist attacks of Kyiv regime and its NATO backers from outside power supply, which is essential for a cooling system, right? For support systems that our nuclear power plant has. So it is clearly intentional attempt of NATO countries and their proxy regime to create a nuclear disaster, right? I'm quite sure Western public is either not informed about this terrorist activity, nuclear terrorist activity of their governments, or very poorly informed, because Western media rarely writes anything about this stuff. But they should know that their own governments are causing nuclear disaster, right? And just because we're being lucky until now that this nuclear disaster did not occur does not mean that this is going to continue. At one point, as a result of these terrorist attacks on nuclear power plants, something terrible might happen, actually, right? And then no one is safe, by the way. I mean, lessons of Chernobyl nuclear disaster should not be forgotten. And when that disaster occurs, we all remember, isn't it? I mean, maybe not all of us remember, maybe not all of us were even born at the time. I was, but according to reports that we have, dear friends, a radioactive fund was increased all over the Europe after that disaster, even in UK. And still to nowadays, certain areas are prohibited to go in Norway, in UK, I believe, also in Welsh and elsewhere. Nothing to be said about Pripyat city and some parts of Belarus, for example, that were affected. So Western so-called elites, globalists, are endangering tens of millions of people with this nuclear terrorism, right? But let me give you details from this report. The Ukrainian armed forces are targeting the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant to create a threat of nuclear disaster and destabilize the plant's operations. This was reported to us by Yevgenia Yashina, communications director at the Zaporozhye NPP. The security situation at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant remains extremely tense. The plant is under constant threat due to systematic shelling by the Ukrainian armed forces. Any incident could have dire consequences, the scale of which is difficult to imagine. Compared to 2022, the strikes have become more targeted, but no less dangerous. Their goal remains unchanged: to destabilize the plant's operations and create a threat of a nuclear disaster. Yashina said, according to her, the designs of their power units with the VVER 1000 reactors, which include their units at the Zaporozhye NPP, are among the most reliable and safe in the world. Their design and construction were carried out in accordance with the most stricter requirements for resistance to various external and internal impacts, including extreme natural events and man-made accidents. At the same time, it's fundamentally important to understand that no nuclear power plant in the world was designed to withstand constant fire exposure, constant shelling, basically, that NATO and Kyiv regime is doing. The key risk in the current situation is not so much to the reactor vessels themselves, but to critical auxiliary equipment, power supply systems, cooling system, control system, etc. This equipment necessary for safe shutdown and maintaining the reactor under control. has a lower level of physical protection. Damage to its Twitter as a result of shelling could lead to disruption of a normal operation and as a result serious consequences. And even though, I mean, majority of us probably are not nuclear scientists, some of us could be, some members of community, but majority of us are not nuclear scientists, I guess, but we do understand that cooling system and other support systems are absolutely vital, isn't it? Because even though nuclear reactors in ZMPP are shut down, they are in a cold shutdown stage, right? Nevertheless, nuclear rods, nuclear fuel have to be cooled down constantly. There can be no pauses there. Otherwise, this nuclear fuel still can go into a meltdown. And that can cause a tremendous catastrophe, right? And so I think it is important. I'm reporting about situation around the nuclear power plants, about nuclear terrorism of the Western countries and their proxy regime. But nevertheless, I think we should always pay attention to this matter, because it's, I mean, yet again, tens of millions of people, potentially hundreds of millions of people being endangered by globalists and their puppet regimes. That's how irresponsible those elements actually are. And I said, dear friends, very rarely Western media pays any attention to situations around the nuclear power plants. But surprisingly, somewhat surprisingly, British Guardian actually published some article about the matter, although they did try to avoid mentioning that it's a Kiev regime and Kiev regime's backers that are targeting Russian nuclear power plants and endangering millions of people. At least they did write an article on the matter, which will let at least some people in the West to think about, right, consequences of the actions of their beloved elites there in the West. So Guardian, citing IAEA experts, warns that the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant has been cut off from external electricity for 3 days, which is true, by the way. Maybe last night power supply was resumed, but I did not see reports on that by now. Cooling and safety systems now rely entirely on diesel generators after the last power line was severed. And why Guardian is not reporting why ZMPP has lost their power supply? Why Guardian is not reporting that Kiev regime, with the assistance of its NATO backers, are targeting ZMPP on a regular basis and cutting off outside power supply, which is essential for security of their ZMPP, including cooling system. You know why Guardian is not reporting about it? Because Guardian has no journalists. It's a pure propaganda outlet, right? As literally all the other so-called media outlets in the West, all of them are propaganda means. And only occasionally they are writing about some serious stuff. And even then, I mean, they cannot get rid of their propagandist essence, right? And they are not sharing actual, true, full information. Experts caution that prolonged operation on the backup power risks failure of cooling system, which could lead to overheating and potential fuel meltdown. The paper draws parallels with the Fukushima disaster, where reactors lost cooling after 9.0 earthquake and aftermath tsunami disabled emergency generators. Within 3 days, 3 reactors melted down through contamination held, and there were no direct casualties. Exceeding 72 hours without external power is seen as a critical threshold. Yes, once again, why Guardian is not saying, or the experts of the IAEA, which is a tool in hands of globalists, neocons, and Zionists, why this formerly UN body, IAEA, or its experts are not saying that it's a key regime that is causing this nuclear disaster. But topic is important, and at least Guardian write about it something. Russia's Rosatom reports that Ukrainian strike destroyed the power lines. Kiev's Energoatom in turn accuses Russia of deliberately keeping the station disconnected. I mean, yes, Kiev regime representatives. I mean, they're sniffing too much of this white powder, isn't it? And those psychopaths and their Western backers, they are out of their mind clearly, and they're coming up with this nonsense on regular basis that it's Russia that shells itself. Yeah, of course. And unfortunately, some idiots or many idiots in the Western world probably will believe in that. As they believe, by the way, that Russia destroyed Nord Stream pipeline, and as they believe in all the other nonsensical propaganda pushes, propaganda statements that Western so-called elites were pushing, right, on the public. Unfortunately, vast majority of the society in the Western world has been zombified with this and totally brainwashed. And I'm not sure they can be saved at this point, no matter how much truth you were going to tell them. They just would not be able to digest it or take it, acknowledge it. They just completely brainwashed, brain dead, actually, right? But yes, the danger is there, by the way, and well, at least I'm reporting about it on a regular basis. That being said, dear friends, last night Russian armed forces conducted relatively large-scale drone and missile strikes on military and logistical infrastructure of the Western-backed terrorist regime of Zelensky. Dozens of cruise missiles were launched, hundreds of drones. Kiev regime is claiming that about 600 drones were launched and some 40, 45, up to 50 different type of missiles. As always, Kiev regime claims that they intercepted almost 100% of all aerial targets. Up to you if you believe in that or not. I definitely don't. But nevertheless, that's what is being circulating on internet. RIA Novosti, meanwhile, is reporting that according to Russian underground, Russian military strike on Ukraine's military facilities. So Russian forces struck the main base of the Ukrainian Navy near the Achakov last night. Nikolaev underground coordinator Sergei Lebedev told RIA Novosti. So Nikolaev region, 3 strikes targets are military depots and their training grounds. Achakov was targeted where this naval base is located. Also, Russian armed forces last night targeted their supply hubs in Kirovograd region, MLRS positions and storage facilities in the border areas of the Chernigov region, the city of Bakhmach, where important railway junctions are, with an oil depot and the military units, also supply depots and communication points of the Ukrainian armed forces in their Nizhin and their Priluki districts, railway junction and the warehouse complex in their Zmirinsky and Helsinki districts of their Vinnytsia region, local fuel storage facilities and the railway hub in Kanatopo, military infrastructure on the eastern outskirts of Sumy, air defense facilities, warehouses and logistic bases in Kiev and the Kiev region, air defense systems in the Dnipropetrovsk region and Odessa region, according to online map of the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine. At around 6:45 a.m., air raid siren was sounded across the country for the second time in past 24 hours. So relatively large-scale Russian long-range precise strikes on enemy military and logistical infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and so on. And well, unfortunately, in certain areas, in Kiev, for example, reports are that there was a collateral damage as a result of last night's military operations. Of course, Kiev regime is blaming Russia for targeting civilians, but in reality, well, Kiev regimes and NATO's air defense systems once again demonstrated how inadequate they are, right? NATO troops that are operating with these Patriots and NASAMs and IRIS-Ts and their puppets from the regime once again bombed basically with their air defense systems civilian areas in Kiev. And I'm not just saying it, by the way. I'm going to show you a video and you'll be the judge, right? You'll be the judge. So that's a video from CCTV, right? I mean, you can see launch of a missile according to reports. This is a Patriot. So missile goes up, loses the target, goes down, and massive explosion. And who they gonna blame? They're gonna blame Russians targeted civilian areas. I mean, really? Let's watch this once again. Clearly, we can see launch of a Patriot missile. Allegedly, it was a Patriot. It could be IRIS-T or anything like that. So missile goes up, did not track target, goes down, and massive explosion. This is not the first time, isn't it? There's so many videos are circulating on internet when Kiev regime's so-called air defense systems are obliterating buildings or entire, residential blocks on the Kiev controlled territory in different parts of different cities, right? So that's how it is. Once again, dear friends, launch of a missile, air defense interceptor missile. It didn't track nothing, and boom. That's it. Who knows, dear friends, or these Patriot missiles or whatever the system was used, how old is this? Who knows when these missile interceptors were produced, how well they were maintained. There is so many questions, isn't it? Because regularly, this is not a one-off occasion. Almost every time Russia is launching drone and missile strikes on military and logistical infrastructure of their enemy, every time we are seeing this kind of videos when Kiev regime's air defense systems are basically bombing their own territory. Due to malfunction, due to poor qualification of their manpower that is operating with these systems. Reasons can be different, but these kind of videos have been published on internet on just too many times, right? Too many times. Unfortunately, they're going to blame Russia. Excuse me. Unfortunately, of course, whenever there is casualties, collateral damage, of course, Kiev regime and Western so-called media, Western public figures, going to go wild and blame Russia, that Russia is intentionally targeting civilians. For God's sake, Kiev regime itself is saying that some 600 drones and missiles were launched, right? So if Russia is intentionally targeting civilians, how come that as a result of these enormous strikes, few people are hurt among civilians? Which is tragedy, by the way. Don't get me wrong. One civilian casualty is way too much, right? It's a tragedy, obviously. But unfortunately, when there is a high-intensity conflict, collateral damage is practically inevitable to occur. But Western so-called elites, they are so, intellectually incapable, and their propaganda means, by the way, that they love to push this narrative that Russia intentionally targets civilians constantly, right? But somehow no one is asking in very same West, from so-called media at least, that how come that they are launching like 500 drones and there's 3, 4, 5 people dead or 10 people, unfortunately, sometimes. Not hundreds, not thousands, but few. But to ask the question, one have to be journalist, right? And Western media lacks journalists, big time. But yet again, dear friends, don't get me wrong. Any collateral damage is a tragedy, of course, and any loss of civilian life is a tragedy, obviously. And Russian armed forces are trying hard, by the way. They do whatever they can to minimize casualties among civilians. And we all know that. We can compare, by the way, how Russian militaries are operating and let's say how Israeli militaries are operating. I mean, you cannot even compare. There is nothing to compare there, right? Israeli militaries have no care about civilian casualties, literally no care about civilian casualties. Russian militaries in many occasions are risking their lives, their own lives, to minimize casualties among civilians. And how many videos we have seen when Russian troops are ending up under enemy fire in their attempt to evacuate civilians, to shield civilians. Let's continue with some more news, dear friends. And I just questioned, isn't it, capabilities of these Western supplied air defense systems that Kiev regime, formerly Kiev regime, is operating with. And it well might be that these NASAMs and these IRIS-Ts and Patriots are just too old. And that's why there is a regular occurrence when these air defense systems are malfunctioning and targeting Kiev control territory itself, right? As I show you in that short video. And well, question is legit, obviously, and most likely one of the explanations is that these missile systems are old or very old, right? For example, the Israeli Patriot systems that allegedly have been supplied to Kiev regime. And this was acknowledged by Zelensky himself. I remind you, dear friends, that a couple of months ago, Israeli ambassador into Kiev stated that they have provided weapons to this Western-backed terrorist regime of Zelensky. But then officials in Tel Aviv, in Israel, debunked or rejected this claim of their own ambassador on the Kiev-controlled territory. And now, after several months, Zelensky is basically openly saying that Israel did provide Patriot systems to Ukrainian terrorists, and I guess these Patriot systems are old. But I cannot imagine Israel is sending to Kiev regime well-capable, modern type of Patriot. And Patriots, by the way, are old systems. Like Patriot is being created like 40 years ago or even all before that, right? And I guess Israel transferred to Kiev regime some very old Patriot systems that they had. And well, it well could be that in that video that I show you, it's an Israeli old Patriot system that bombed their Kiev controlled territory itself when, missile failed. Zelensky, dear friends, said at their briefing with the journalists that the Israel Patriot systems has been used by the armed forces of Ukraine for a month already. Ukraine will receive 2 more new systems in the fall. And I will question how new those systems actually are, because no way Israel would transfer, by the way, new air defense system to Kiev regime or to anyone for that matter. It's just impossible, right? Dear friends, there was a right now super chat from Daniela Modos on Rumble, and I will highlight this super chatter once new segment is finished. I remind you, dear friends, that this is not just a big community chat today, but also fundraising. So hopefully it will work out well, so that next week I will be less stressed, being fully focused on this project, which is a full-time job and with regular overtimes. TASS news agency is also reporting that Russian armed forces, struck military airfields and the Ukrainian military-industrial complex. This is Defense Ministry statement about last night's strikes. Let me give you some details. So tonight, the Russian armed forces launched a massive strike using long-range air and their sea-based precision weapons and attack drones against Ukrainian military-industrial complex facilities used by Ukrainian armed forces, as well as military airfield infrastructure. Their strikes objectives were achieved, and all design targets were hit. Their military department reported, and well, that's about it from this statement. The Russian Defense Ministry, as you know, it's extremely conservative institution, understandably so, and very rarely they share too much information. just some brief statements. But nevertheless, I think it's worth paying attention to what official statements are from the defense ministry. Meanwhile, interesting report, I think that US offers Europe to buy HUD air defense systems, which costs more than billion euro, by the way. So I guess European countries no longer have most of their IRIS-Ts, most of their NASAMs, most of their Patriot systems, and to produce new ones, I mean, it takes time, obviously. And US and are in no position to basically produce these systems in dozens and dozens each year. It's just not happening. I guess they have some HUD systems in storage in US, and they want to get rid of it and force Europeans to buy each system of it for over billion euros. So representatives of Lockheed Martin said in an interview that negotiations are currently underway with the potential European buyers. Michael Williamson, president of the Lockheed Martin International, stated that the system costs more than 1 billion euro and can be integrated into European Sky Shield initiative, which involves creating a unified air defense system under Germany's leadership. Germany has already purchased their free Israeli Arrow-free missile defense systems to intercept ballistic missiles, but HUD could compete and be adopted by other countries. So let's see. By the way, I guess Washington has enough influence over there, Berlin and other capitals in Europe, to force them to buy this HUD garbage, by the way, which is garbage. Let's be real here. West does not have really good air defense systems. Are Western air defense systems, HUD and Patriot and NASAMs and IRIS-Ts, somewhat capable? For sure. Are there dangerous systems for, let's say, fighter planes or aerial? First of all, for fighter planes, that's what concerns me. I want Russian pilots to be safe, right? Are those systems dangerous? Oh, they are, for sure. But we already have seen quite a number of occasions, isn't it, when Russian pilots successfully avoided attacks from Patriot batteries, for example. Unfortunately, this is not always the case, but we already have stories, documented stories, when Russian pilots, even on not most agile planes like Su-34s that are frontline bombers, by the way, not the most maneuverable planes out there in Russian inventory, but pilots on Su-34s even managed to avoid like 3 Patriot missiles at once, right? So nevertheless, are these Western air defense systems, Patriots, NASAMs, IRIS-Ts, HUDs, dangerous? Yes, they are, but are they as good as Russian S-300, 350, S-400, S-500? No, man, nowhere close. And that's why I'm saying it's a freaking garbage, man. It's a freaking garbage if you take in account that they cost billion and more, right? Come on, man. Russian militaries can buy like 3 S-400s for $1 billion, right? That is 10 times better than anything that NATO can come up with. But anyways, unfortunately, they still are dangerous. And of course, Russian fighter pilots, first of all, Russian pilots, should be as careful as possible, because, it's still dangerous stuff, but, not as good as Russian air defense systems. That's what I want to say. Meanwhile, the French TASS news agencies also reported yesterday that Russian armed forces liberated Darilovo settlement, Mayskaya settlement, this is in a DPR, and the Stepova settlement in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Let me show you on the map where these settlements are located. So when it comes to the Dnipropetrovsk region, this is Stepova settlement, tiny village, but nevertheless very important, because take a look at the map difference. It's an operational space, isn't it? It's operational space. Russian troops already liberated there, I don't know, about 15 settlements, dozen settlements basically, in the Dnipropetrovsk region since the beginning of this offensive in that direction. And clearly, I mean, it's one take on the map, and you clearly can see that, once order comes to Russian troops, by the way, to move, to conduct offensive operations, large scale or sectoral scale offensive operations in the Dnipropetrovsk region, then I can understand why many military experts are predicting that Russian advance is going to be very rapid, because it's a steppe area. It's a steppe area, mainly Dnipropetrovsk region. Unlike DPR and LPR, which are extremely urbanized, Dnipropetrovsk is picking fields, by the way, mainly fields, unending fields, right? It's a steppe area that very difficult to defend, basically, because there is not that many settlements which you can use as a stronghold, right? So significant developments are happening, of course, in Dnipropetrovsk direction. When it comes to these other settlements, this one is Maiskaya settlement in the DPR. This is on the northern side of Konstantinovka. And when it comes to Konstantinovka itself, Russian troops already are conducting operations on the outskirts of the city, and Russian DRGs are operating inside the city itself. And Russian drones, by the way, are making life of enemies in Konstantinovka total hell. They are, enemy troops are afraid to go out on the street anywhere on the city there. Same goes for Seversk, by the way. Same goes for Kupiansk, of course. This is a Darilova settlement in the DPR also, which is Liman direction on the northwestern side of Liman. And Russian troops, I already reported earlier that Russian troops are basically in control of main supply and support line between Seversk and Liman, right? After liberating Serbiansky forestry, Russian troops are basically right now already on outskirts of Yampol. Some channels are reporting, some military channels are reporting that Russian troops already are operating inside Yampol itself, but supply and support line that Seversk garrison, for example, has is already under direct Russian fire control. And when it comes to other cities, Russian troops have established control over there, like 65% of all the buildings in Kupiansk, for example, in the Kharkov region. And also, of course, Pokrovsk-Mirnograd direction is very important, and Russian troops are conducting operation and soon will establish full control, I guess, over the most western part of Pokrovsk. Reports are coming in that, for example, Russian troops being spotted in vicinity of the church on the western side of the city. And that means Russian troops already control several blocks, at least, around this area, right? Russian troops are operating in Mirnograd also. And let me show you Kupiansk, by the way. So this is when it comes to Kupiansk. This map has not been updated, I guess, for quite a while. Some 60%, 65%, according to Defense Ministry's reports, by the way, are under Russian control in this city. Yesterday, I saw some reports on big Russian Telegram channels that Russian troops further intensify offensive in the Volchansk direction, with their significant success. And media is reporting, dear friends, that Russian armed forces finalize their clearing operation of forestry near Sinelnikova settlement, and the encircled group of Kiev regime's forces were almost completely neutralized. So their destruction of the units of 57 separate motorized infantry brigade and 127 separate mechanized brigade, which are trapped in their forest, continues. Currently, their numbers amount to about 2,000 people. And originally, by the way, when reports came about encirclement of Kiev regime's troops in this forestry area on the northern western part of Volchansk, in this forestry, dear friends, initial reports were that from 200 to 500 troops of Kiev regime were trapped in this forest. And now reports are that only a couple of dozens of these survivals from these encircled units are still hiding in this forest. And this is Sinelnikova settlement itself, by the way, on the western side of Volchansk. So significant losses of the Kiev regime's forces in this area, and I guess soon this forestry will be declared mainly or completely free from the enemy forces, and then I guess we will see final push to liberate all of Volchansk. Russian troops can go on offensive from this forestry area, from western side, from northern side, obviously, and from eastern side. So some significant developments there, and also reports are, by the way, that Russian troops basically finished their neutralization of encircled groups of enemy in Klibambik, around Klibambik reservoir. TASS news agency is reporting about it, that Southern Group is destroying Ukrainian armed forces units south of Klibambik reservoir. So units of the Southern Group of forces have improved their positions along their front line, and they continue to destroy the enemy who was blocked south of their Klibambik reservoir in the Donetsk People's Republic. Let me show you area that we are talking about. So read these maps, by the way. I might become expert in picking geography of this former republic. That's a Klibambik reservoir, by the way. On the southern side, Russian troops are finalizing clearing operation. In this pocket, hundreds of military personnel of Kiev regime was trapped, and soon I guess all of this area will be first mapped as a gray zone and then mapped as under full Russian control.
Hello everyone, I hope you find informative and useful this short clip from main news update, and if so, please click that like button and leave some commentary just about anything. It might help to deal with the algorithm and reach wider audience. And if you like my work in general and want to support to save this media project, you can assist through several ways. You can donate to this project through PayPal platform or Boosty, also with crypto currencies, or you can subscribe to my Patreon page and page on Boosty, where I have quite a lot of extra content on regular basis. All the links are on this video in description box and in the pinned comment. And of course, many thanks to everyone who already helped and continues to support. Thank you.